So we did now fix the styles of the control component. They're also broken for the buttons, though. And the styles are broken here, or the button is unstyled, because in the button component CSS file, I'm looking for button elements, but we have no button elements in the button component template file. We only have spans in here. Now, of course, we could wrap it all with a button and so on, and use app button as an element selector instead of these selectors, but I'm not doing this here for a purpose, as I explained before. Because it is not uncommon that you sometimes want to extend some built-in element like a button and just overwrite its styles and maybe its template, or extend its template. So I want to keep that the way it is. But what we can do instead is target the host element of our component. Because every Angular component has a host element, which is simply the element that is selected by the selector. So for the control component, the host element would be this app control element. So if we go to our page and we inspect it, and we select that input, we can see that that input is inside of a paragraph, and that paragraph is inside of that app control element. And that would be the host element of our control component. For the button component, the host element is therefore the button with the attribute app button on it. And in your styles, you can target that host element, which I do want to target here since I want to style that button, by using the special :host CSS selector. Now, this is not a CSS course, so we will rarely work in the CSS files, but this special host selector is a CSS feature you should know when working with Angular, because it does allow you to directly apply styles to the rendered host element. So I'll do that here and replace all my button occurrences with host, like this. And attached you find the updated button.component CSS file, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. With that button looks the way it did before, but now we're achieving this by targeting the host element. So components have a host element. Every component has a host element. And as you learned, it's simply the element that's targeted by the component selector. Now, this host element feature is really important to understand. It is important to understand that what you select here is actually rendered to the DOM. That there is an app control element in the DOM of the page that's visited by the browser, for example. And we can often use this to our advantage. For example, here in this control component, I wrap my label and ng content with this paragraph. Now, that is fine, but if you then inspect this here, you of course see that in that form, for every control, we have app control, so our host element, and then in there the paragraph, and then in there the label and the input. That of course works, but this paragraph is kind of an unnecessary element in there. We don't need that many levels of nesting here. Why don't we just put the label and input directly into this app control element? Well, we can of course do that. We can remove this paragraph, but if we do that, then we'll break our styles again, because in the control component CSS file, I'm looking for elements with control as a class on them. So therefore, if I reload now, the styles are broken, as you can tell. But of course, you also already know the workaround. Instead of targeting control here, we can target :host. So that we look for labels and inputs and text areas inside of our host element, so inside of the app-control element. And if we do that and save that, it's still broken somehow. Well, now it's broken here because for this component, we disabled view encapsulation. We set it to none. Now, as a result, this component, of course, still has a host element. We saw that in the DOM before, it is there. But this host CSS selector won't work because these styles of this component are indeed no longer scoped to this component. Instead, they are applied as global styles to the entire page, as if you would have put them into the styles.css file in the end. And therefore, there is no real connection between these styles and these CSS rules and the component to which you attached them. That's why this host selector doesn't target this component's host element with view encapsulation set to none. So for this specific use case, we can't use this host selector. But we can do something else. I'll go back to using .control. And we could now go to the place where we use app control, so here in the new ticket component HTML file, and add this control class here. Because you can add extra attributes like this on your components, even if they're not inputs of those components. You can still add any attributes you want. They often just might not have any effect. But here it will have an effect, because by adding a class here, we're adding this class which is wanted by the control component CSS file. So by adding this class here to app control in the new ticket component template, if you save it, you'll get back the look you had before. So that is a possible solution, and it's important to understand that you can add any attributes of your choice to your own elements. Of course, we now have that duplication. We have to add that class whenever we use app control, and that's something that's easy to forget. It's also some unnecessary work. That's why Angular gives you another way of adding attributes and properties to your host elements. We can remove that class here, and then go to our control component. And there we can add another setting to the component decorator, another configuration property. And that's the host property. Now, host wants an object as a value, and that object then takes any key value pairs of your choice. But what this object will do is it will add the key value pairs you add here as properties on your host element. So here I could add a key named class and set the value to control. And that will add this class attribute, you could say, this class property to app control wherever it's being used. So I only need to define it once here, but it will be added to all app controls anywhere in the application. So if I save that and I reload, this still looks the way it did before. But if I now inspect that, you see that on app control, there is this class. And that's now here because of this host property we added to this component decorator. And you can use this host property not just when encapsulation is set to none. Instead, you can always add this if you have certain properties that should be added to the host element. And that can be another useful feature.